ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਭਖਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ, ਜੋ ਹੈ ਨਰਿੰਦਰ ਮੋਦੀ ਅਤੇ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਹੋਈ ਕਸ਼ਮਕਸ਼। ਦੋਸਤੋ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੱਸਾਂਗੇ ਕਿ ਕੋਇਨ ਦੇ 3 ਸਾਈਡਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਹਨ, ਹੈਡ, ਟੇਲ ਅਤੇ ਐਜ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਐਜ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ। ਥੋੜਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਸਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਰਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਨਿੱਜਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਤਲ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਮਰਡਰ ਦਾ ਇਲਜ਼ਾਮ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਏਜੰਸੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਇਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੱਥ ਹੋਣ ਤੋਂ ਇਨਕਾਰ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ। ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਮੰਗ ਦੇ ਤਹਿਤ ਜਾਂ ਮੰਗ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਸਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਰੈਫਰੈਂਡਮ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਹਟਿਆ ਹੈ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਸਕਸੈਸਫੁਲ ਰੈਫਰੈਂਡਮ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ। ਦੋਸਤੋ, ਪੀਸਫੁਲ ਰਹਿ ਕੇ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਮੰਗ ਕਰਨੀ ਕੋਈ ਗਲਤ ਮੰਗ ਨਹੀਂ, ਇਹ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਹੀ ਜਾਇਜ਼ ਮੰਗ ਹੈ। ਪਰ ਕੁਝ ਸਮਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਅਚਾਨਕ ਹੀ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਇਲਜ਼ਾਮ ਭਾਰਤ ਉੱਤੇ ਲਗਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹਨ ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਮਰਡਰ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਏਜੰਸੀਆਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕਰਵਾਇਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨ ਸਿਟੀਜ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਹਮਲਾ ਹੈ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਬਾਹਰਲੀਆਂ ਏਜੰਸੀਆਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ, ਪਰ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਪ੍ਰੂਫ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ।
Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
If these allegations are true, they represent an outrageous affront to Canada's sovereignty. Our citizens must be safe.
ਦੇਖਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਸਟੇਟਮੈਂਟ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਕਿਉਂ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਗਈ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਸਟੇਟਮੈਂਟ ਕਿਸੇ ਟੀਵੀ ਚੈਨਲ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਂ ਅਖਬਾਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਜਾ ਸਕਦੀ ਸੀ, ਪਰ ਇਹ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਹਾ ਗਿਆ। ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਹਰ ਪਾਸੇ ਹੜਕੰਪ ਮਚ ਗਿਆ ਅਤੇ ਭਾਰਤੀਆਂ ਏਜੰਸੀਆਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਸਬੂਤ ਮੰਗਿਆ ਗਿਆ।
No specific information has been shared by Canada on this case, either then or before or after. We have, as we have said, or I think it's been made very clear, we are willing to look at any specific information. We have conveyed this to the Canadian side, made it clear to them that we are willing to look at any specific information that is provided to us. But so far, we have not received any such specific information.
ਕੀ ਇਸ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਹੋਰ ਵਜ੍ਹਾ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਇਸ ਮਾਮਲੇ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਣਬੁੱਝ ਕੇ ਵੱਡਾ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਨ, ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਇਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ। ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦਿਖਾਉਂਦੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਛੋਟੇ ਜਿਹੇ 2 ਕਲਿੱਪ ਤੇ ਸਮਝੋ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਕਿੱਧਰ ਨੂੰ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ।
Are back in Parliament after the winter break, and economic matters and federal health spending are top of mind, just as they are for most Canadians. And all the parties are busy positioning themselves, looking ahead to the next election.
The year 2023 will witness a number of states across the country voting for new governments. Assembly elections are due in 4 northeastern states, 3 in the north and 2 down south. From northeast, Meghalaya, Nagaland and Tripura will go to polls in the first quarter of 2023, while Mizoram will elect a new government by the end of the year. Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, which are politically crucial states for BJP and Congress in the north, will also elect new governments before the year ends. Assembly elections are also scheduled in southern states of Karnataka and Telangana. Speculation is abuzz that Jammu and Kashmir could join the 9 states to end the long spell of
ਇਹ ਸਨ 2 ਕਲਿੱਪ, ਇੱਕ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦਾ ਅਤੇ ਦੂਜਾ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦਾ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਤਹਿਤ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੱਲ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ, ਜਿਸ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਹੈ ਵੋਟਾਂ। ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਦੱਸ ਦਈਏ ਕਿ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਦੀ ਪਪੂਲੈਰਿਟੀ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਦਿਨ ਬ ਦਿਨ ਘਟਦੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਨਰਿੰਦਰ ਮੋਦੀ ਦਾ ਹਾਲ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਚੰਗਾ ਨਹੀਂ इंडिया अलायंस से खड़े होने तो बाद।
जिस सनातन को गांधी जी ने जीवन पर्यंत माना, जिन भगवान श्री राम ने उनको जीवन भर प्रेरणा दी, उनके आखिरी शब्द बने हे राम। जिस सनातन ने उन्हें अस्पृश्यता के खिलाफ आंदोलन चलाने के लिए प्रेरित किया, ये इंडी गठबंधन के लोग, ये गमंडिया गठबंधन के लोग उस सनातन परंपरा को समाप्त करना चाहते हैं।
First time, I think, since the last election, we have seen that the federal conservatives have been leading in the polls. Having said that, we typically don't elect a government for one term. But what is behind that momentum, that conservative momentum?
I'm not sure if I would say it as conservative momentum as that the Liberals are falling. I don't think there's any outbreak of Andrew Scheer mania or Jagmeet Singh mania for the NDP. I think what you've seen is a fairly significant falling off for the Liberals, driven as party standings typically are, driven by discontent with the leader. It wasn't so long ago, end of 2016, early 2017, the Liberals were 20 points ahead of the Conservatives. They're now 4 or 5 points behind them when you average out all the polls. And it does seem to be located in the persona of Justin Trudeau. I think part of that is just overexposure. I mean, I've never seen a party invest quite so heavily in the persona and image of their leader. All parties do to an extent, but the degree to which the Liberals had Justin Trudeau on every magazine cover, every viral video, every selfie, you live by that and you die by that.
But it worked for them, okay? You live by that, you die by that. I mean, they created this movement because of that.
Yeah, I think it was, and I think partly it was coming out of that election campaign in 2015 where the Liberals presented themselves and they presented their leader as something very new and very different. People were very jaded and discontented after the Harper years, not so much with the direction of the country, but just they didn't like the tone and style of the government. It was very overbearing, very partisan, very mean-spirited. And so the time was ripe, I suppose, for a party to present itself in a different light. And Justin Trudeau, partly because of who he was, being the son of the former Prime Minister, maybe he was sort of above that kind of ugly, mean-spirited politics. So they certainly sold themselves that way. And I think a number of events have kind of contributed to dispelling that they've come across at times looking cynical and double-dealing in a way that doesn't fit with that image. So then you're left with more of the sort of surface level stuff of the pretty boy and the picture taking, and the India trip contributed to that. I just think that it's kind of hollowed him out. He doesn't look like the idealistic young prince anymore. He looks like a silly person posing for pictures and who's not really that different from other politicians. I'm painting in very broad brush terms here, but I think that's some of the disillusionment that has happened, particularly perhaps with center-left voters over the last months and years.
Okay. Any which way you slice it, though, I mean, this government is going down in history. I mean, they push their social policies every opportunity they get. I mean, whether it comes to trade negotiation or what have you. I think they're going down in history, and I don't think you can really challenge that.
Depending on what you mean by going down in history. How much have they actually achieved as opposed to how much have they talked about in that vein is an interesting area for discussion. But it's also, I think, some of that relentless talking about these issues in a kind of a preachy, moralistic tone, I think is also part of their decline. When you put that together with the kind of politics as usual double dealing and with the kind of selfie and socks stuff, the combination is of a general kind of, I think, unseriousness. But it doesn't look like they're paying attention to the issue, the meat and potatoes issues that are on most Canadians' minds. And so what's interesting is, even after that budget where they said the word gender 398 times, polls are differing, but it doesn't seem to be that they're getting the huge lift with women voters, I think, that they maybe were hoping to get.
Right, it didn't really move the needle.
Yeah.
When it comes to deficits, the economy, our money, taxes, they've gotten a lot of flack with respect to these deficits, but I'm wondering whether or not this is something of our time. Like, this generation is so used to dealing with that debt Like they're so used to being debt-riddled that I don't know if those deficits really matter.
No, and public opinion has kind of shifted over that. You know, if you came of age in the 90s or 80s and 90s, you were very concerned about the deficit because we had these enormous deficits that we spent 2 or 3 decades trying to get rid of. And for a while there, it seemed as if that was the taboo. You could never run deficits. Well, they certainly proved in 2015 that that taboo wasn't there anymore. You could run small deficits, but remember, they said they were going to run deficits of less than $10 billion for 2 years, and then they would balance the budget and bring the debt to GDP ratio down. So there was still a kind of a frugality that was, I think, in the public mind that they had to pay attention to. It just wasn't an absolute taboo anymore. And look, yeah, we're not going to go to hell because we run deficits of $15 billion or $18 billion a year. I think there is a concern in the longer run as the population ages that all of our governments, provincial and federal, are going to be faced with really severe fiscal challenges, and that right now, when we're still on the crest of that, we haven't really dived into that, and when we've had no recession for the last 10 years, I think there's a sense that we should probably be in surplus right now, not in deficit. So there can be some exaggerated rhetoric about the deficits, but it's clear that they've taken a different path than they actually promised in the election, and it's one that makes, I think, some people uneasy. And the other thing, of course, is if you don't have any kind of fiscal benchmark you have to meet, it doesn't really put much discipline on spending. You can basically then spend whatever you like, and it just feeds that. That's not an issue that liberals want to have raised of excessive spending. That's one of those issues that they were associated with in the past, and they've been trying to in recent.
ਨਰਿੰਦਰ ਮੋਦੀ ਨੂੰ ਕਰਨਾਟਕਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰੀਸੈਂਟਲੀ ਮਾਰ ਪਈ ਅਤੇ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਵੀ ਪੋਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਿਸਕਦੇ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ.
For the opposition there in that key state election. Now the thing is it a one-off?
Well, impossible to answer that one, Rish, but it is an important one. I can point out that one. The Congress, that's Rahul Gandhi's party, won 135 of 224 seats in the state of Karnataka. That's the state that's home to Bengaluru, India's Silicon.
It's been a while since Canadians have hated a federal government as much as they hate this one. Justin Trudeau has an approval rating of just 36%. And while voters aren't entirely sure of who they would replace him with, 81% of Canadians want somebody different. If an election were held tomorrow, though, Trudeau would be shellacked in vote totals, but could probably stay Prime Minister anyways. The Liberals are masters of what they call vote efficiency. This is where you focus on ridings where the vote share is carefully split between 2 or 3 opponents, so your candidate can win with like 33% of the vote. Secondly, there's this guy, whose caucus has provided relatively unconditional support to the Liberals in exchange for a few goodies, like the Canada Dental benefit. So even if Trudeau doesn't get a majority, he's got the NDP cushion to put him over the top. Add it all up, and yes, the Conservatives are utterly dominating the popular vote lately, but you need a whole lot more to dislodge this guy.
ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਕਲਿੱਪ ਦਿਖਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਨੇ G20 ਸਮਿਟ ਦੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਭਾਰਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਹਾ.
Obviously, Canada will always defend freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of peaceful protest. That's something that's extremely important to us. At the same time as we're always there to prevent violence.
ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਪੀਸਫੁਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਸਟਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰਮੋਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ ਤੇ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਹੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਹੱਕ ਵਿੱਚ ਖੜਦੇ ਹਨ. ਪਰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਦਈਏ ਹਾਥੀ ਦੇ ਦੰਦ ਖਾਣ ਦੇ ਹੋਰ ਤੇ ਦਿਖਾਉਣ ਦੇ ਕੁਛ ਹੋਰ. ਦੇਖੋ ਆ ਵੀਡੀਓ.
Put us in jail, but they can't stop us. Welcome to Ottawa. Thank you for being here. Welcome. You're in the right place. You're doing the right thing. Welcome to Ottawa. Please be gentle with the police. They are our brothers.
Whatever they're doing is not right. We stand our grounds. We're not leaving. And we're doing everything peaceful and with love and smile. They have no grounds.
So when they come in here, which they will, what's your plan?
My plan? I park legally. This is federal land. I have my rights to protest peacefully, which I'm doing. And they have no rights. And if they violate my law, we're gonna see in the court.
If they come and tell you leave because it's finished, then what?
Finish what? finished fighting for freedom? No, I decide when it's finished fight. When I know all the mandates are lifted, right? So this is the main point. We came here to have all the mandates lifted, release that law about border checkers, right? So we can go back to work. Without that, I'm not working, so might as well stay here.
C'est bon, c'est bon.
Look at the oppression! Look at the check! We're not touching you! You're ready for it, aren't you? Stay calm! Be gentle with the police!
You do have to look yourself in the mirror every morning. Think about it.
We're not touching you! Put the baton away! Put the baton away! Hey! Move back! We are! Quit touching us! We're not touching you! We are! Yeah, get your hand off him! Don't touch him! Don't touch him! I earned that! Welcome to Ottawa! You gotta tell yourself to just do your job. Hey? That's not going to be good enough. You going to trade less like the worst team? Are you going to trade less? Hey! Trade less like they did with the horse? Huh?
Well, right, that's him sit there, right?
It's legal! Hey, it's not legal! No, you calm down. Sir. Hey, hey. What are you doing? All of you, you're a disgrace. You're a disgrace. You're a disgrace. You're a disgrace. Des animaux. 16-year-old kid, you're innocent traffic. C'est dégueulasse. Un moment donné, vous allez payer pour ça. Vous êtes des criminels. Vous êtes honte.
ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੁਝ ਆਪ ਵੀ ਵੈਕਸੀਨੇਟਡ ਸਨ ਅਤੇ ਕੁਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਨ, ਪਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕ੍ਰਾਸ ਬਾਰਡਰ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਰੋਕਿਆ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ। ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਦੱਸ ਦਈਏ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਟਰੱਕਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਟਾਇਰ ਸਲੈਸ਼ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਗਏ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਖੇੜਿਆ ਗਿਆ, ਘੋੜੇ ਚੜਾਏ ਗਏ ਅਤੇ ਪੀਪਲਸ ਐਮਰਜੈਂਸੀ ਐਕਟ ਲਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਦੋਸਤੋ, ਜਦੋਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਸਟ ਸੜਕਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਉੱਠ ਕੇ ਫੇਸਬੁੱਕ ਤੇ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹਨ, ਇਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਗੁਲਾਮੀ ਦੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਹੋ ਜਾਣੀ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਹਾਕਮ ਨੂੰ ਫੇਸਬੁੱਕ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਫਰਕ ਨਹੀਂ, ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਸੜਕ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਖੜਾ ਹੀ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਦਿਖਦਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਹਾਕਮ ਨੂੰ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ ਭੀੜ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਧ ਕਿਸੇ ਹੋਰ ਚੀਜ਼ ਤੋਂ ਡਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ। ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸੁਣਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜਾਰਡਨ ਪੀਟਰਸਨ ਅਤੇ ਪੈਟਰਿਕ ਬੈਟ-ਡੇਵਿਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਈ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ। ਪੈਟਰਿਕ ਬੈਟ-ਡੇਵਿਡ ਇੱਕ ਅਮਰੀਕਨ ਬਿਲੀਅਨਰ ਅਤੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਪੋਡਕਾਸਟ ਚੈਨਲ ਰਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ ਅਤੇ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਜਾਰਡਨ ਪੀਟਰਸਨ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਮਸ਼ਹੂਰ ਸਾਈਕੋਲੋਜਿਸਟ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਹਨ। ਦੇਖੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹੈ।
Trudeau flees as trucker convoys enters Ottawa. As thousands of protesters enter Ottawa, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his family were moved from their home to an undisclosed location somewhere in the city on Saturday afternoon due to security concerns. A freedom convoy of some 2,700 truckers entered the Canadian capital of Ottawa Saturday to protest Trudeau's
due to
COVID
security concerns.
Yeah, security concerns. This is a PM. So COVID-19 policies. According to the Independent, around 100 big rigs blockaded a main street running past the Canadian Parliament building. So that's going on. He just tested positive for COVID. Now it's coming into U.S. They froze the GoFundMe account, which raised over $10 million and nearly 140,000 people that donated. And now American truckers are kind of getting involved and saying, listen, we're kind of...
Facebook kicked them off yesterday.
Facebook kicked them off.
137,000 subscribers to that group. They kicked them off. Yeah, you wait till you see your election this year. You're going to see plenty of that. That's for sure.
How bad do you think the consequences are going to be? Like, you really think, some people, I talk to some people like who are professionals in my community, are like, what are you talking about, truckers? I haven't seen anything on the news. I'm like, you haven't seen anything? I haven't seen anything on the news. You don't know what's going on with truckers? No, I read Wall Street Journal and New York Times. I know nothing about what's going on in Canadian truckers. So they don't watch, obviously, Fox, and maybe they don't watch podcasts, right?
But isn't that the same thing with the John Hopkins
same
report?
exact thing.
Exactly. It's like, how did you not see it?
The point
how would I?
Yeah, so he says, you really think these truckers are going to have any kind of an influence on anything? It's truckers. You think they're going to have any influence? The way he said it. He said it's like truckers.
Kind of looking down on them because they can't express it with intellectual thought. The
leader of the Socialist Party in Canada, so hypothetically on the side of the working class, the people who are most opposed to the truckers in Canada are the people who vote NDP, the socialists. About 20% of the population stably in Canada. And now and then we have a socialist provincial government. And they've done some good, I don't want to get into that. But like I said, there are people on that side of the equation who, for example, were fostered in the labor movement, and they had things to say. The working class needs to have their say. But the vast majority of people who vote NDP in Canada are opposed to the truckers. It's like, I thought you guys were on the side of the working class. It's like, what's happened? Well, not them. It's like, hey, man, welcome to the working class, those truckers. Well, they're all white supremacists and racists. It's like, really, in Canada, are they now? White supremacists, really? Or Nazis in Canada? There aren't any of them. There was some dimwit was waving a Confederate flag at the rally. And the truckers, he was masked, the truckers stripped him of his mask and chased him away. But all the mainstream press reported Confederate flags at the trucker rally, as if that matters. It's like, it's not like there are a lot of Canadians, by the way, flying the Confederate flag. First of all, that's not our country.
Exactly.
And second, most Canadians, I would say, don't really know in any deep sense what the Confederate flag stands for. I mean,
ਹੁਣ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸੁਣਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਆਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਲੀਡਰ ਅਤੇ ਜਾਰਡਨ ਪੀਟਰਸਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਈ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ। ਇਹ ਹਨ ਪੀਅਰ ਪੋਲੀਅਰ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ PM ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਨ। ਇਹ ਕੰਜ਼ਰਵੇਟਿਵ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਲੀਡਰ ਅਤੇ ਆਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਲੀਡਰ ਹਨ। ਸੁਣੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹੈ ਟਰੱਕਰਸ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਸਟ ਬਾਰੇ।
Stood up for the truckers. So now you've had some time. It's been a couple of months. You've had some time to consider your position. And so can you tell me what you think happened with the trucker protest? And then I'd like to segue into the imposition of the Emergencies Act, which, is grist for the mill, let's say, in terms of discussion. So tell me your response to the truckers protest and convoy and where you stood and where you stand.
So as I said before, the truckers even arrived on Parliament Hill when media asked me about it. I support those peaceful, law-abiding truckers who came to Ottawa to peacefully protest for their livelihoods and liberties. And I simultaneously condemn any individuals who broke laws, behaved badly, or blockaded critical infrastructure. I think it's possible to hold individually accountable bad actors without painting every single person with the same brush. If you went to any protest that had 9 or 10,000 people, you will find bad actors. But that doesn't mean that all 9 or 10,000 are themselves bad actors. For example, I was confronted by a journalist the other day who said, yes, but what about those journalists who sorry, what about those truckers that were angry at journalists and behaved badly or conducted themselves poorly? What do you say to them? Well, I said, well, they should be individually held to account for their behavior. But he said, well, don't you take some responsibility for supporting the cause? And I said, well, let me ask you this. Do you hold every single environmentalist personally responsible for the axe-wielding terrorists who went to the Coastal GasLink pipeline construction site and started trying to kill pipeline workers? Does every single person who's spoken out against pipelines take personal responsibility for what those axe-wielding terrorists did? Or are the axe-wielders themselves personally responsible? I mean, even I would say, no, you can criticize a pipeline. I disagree with you. You can criticize a pipeline without taking personal responsibility for the violence of some eco-terrorist you've never even met. And so I walked around. I saw the truckers on Parliament Hill. By the way, most people weren't actually there. The media depiction was total nonsense. If you watched it on television, you would think that it was Armageddon. Jordan, every single member of Parliament that condemned the truckers in the House of Commons during the protest had to walk right through the trucker convoy, right? Because they were parked right up front. There was no way to get in without walking through them, and not one of them were prevented from walking through. It was peaceful. It was most of the time sort of a jubilant type celebration. And people came and went. They walked around on Parliament Hill. Members of Parliament of all political stripes walked through the protest every day without incident. And yes, some businesses were inconvenienced and lost money. They should be compensated. But by and large, it was a peaceful protest by people who generally don't get involved in political activism. They're truckers. They drive truck all day.
ਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਹੁਣ ਸੁਣਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੁਲਸੀ ਗਬਾਰਡ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਹਵਾਈ ਦੇ ਰਿਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟੇਟਿਵ ਹਨ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਕੀ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਹੈ।
Minister Justin Trudeau in Canada has yet again very recently shown just how anti-freedom and anti-democracy he actually is.
We have a robust functioning democracy, and public protests are an important part of making sure we're getting messages out there, and Canadians are getting messages out there and highlighting how they feel about various issues. But using protests to demand changes to public policy is something that I think is worrisome.
Okay. So here we have the Prime Minister of Canada saying that, yes, we have a highly functioning democracy and people's voices, the Canadian people's voices should be heard and they have the right and freedom to protest. However, if those protests are used to demand change in government policy, then no, that shouldn't be allowed. Just in that statement in and of itself, you got to wonder how this guy doesn't see the hypocrisy in his singular phrase.
ਦੋਸਤੋ ਕੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਮਸਲੇ ਨੂੰ UN ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਚੁੱਕਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਅਤੇ ਉਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕੀ ਕਿਹਾ ਗਿਆ।
A prime minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
UN ਦੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ। ਕਮਾਲ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਆ ਵੀ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਨ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਹਰ ਧਰਮ ਦਾ ਸਮਰਥਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ। ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਸਿੱਖ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੰਮਿਆ ਹਾਂ ਅਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਯਕੀਨ ਰੱਖਦਾ ਹਾਂ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਤੇਗ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਸੰਕਲਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਹਰ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣਾ ਧਰਮ ਮੰਨਣ ਦੀ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ ਹੋਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਹਰ ਧਰਮ ਨੂੰ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਕਰਨੀ ਹਰ ਰਾਜ ਦਾ ਧਰਮ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਹਰੇਕ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਧਰਮ ਚੁਣਨ ਦਾ ਅਧਿਕਾਰ ਹੈ। ਪਰ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲਾ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਕਿ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਚਰਚਾ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਕੁਝ ਕਰਨਗੇ? ਸੁਣੋ ਇਹ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ। ਇਹ ਨੇ ਟਕਰ ਕਾਲਸਨ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਨੰਬਰ 1 ਗਿਣੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਰਿਪੋਰਟਰ ਹਨ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਰੈਬਲ ਨਿਊਜ਼ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੋਈ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ।
Like we're exaggerating a little bit? Well, they're burning Catholic and Anglican churches in recent days. Leftist groups are. But Canada's leaders aren't condemning the burning of churches. No, they're endorsing the burning of churches. The head of the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association, a monster called Harsha Walia, tweeted this, quote, "Burn it all down." Then a close confidant of the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, a man called Gerald Butts, called the arson, and we're quoting now, understandable. A woman called Heidi Matthews, meanwhile, of Harvard Law School, described the attacks as, quote, the right of resistance to systemic injustice. Burning churches. Now. This is not the Spanish Civil War. This is now in Canada. And not just churches. Rioters just tore down the statue of Queen Victoria in Winnipeg on Canada Day.
No pride in genocide!
Now, we'd love to go inside Canada tonight, but we can't get there. It's like 1985 Albania. It's a closed country. So instead, we're speaking by satellite tonight to Ezra Levant with Rebel Media within Canada. He joins us now. Ezra, thanks so much for doing the show. What is going on in Canada? Serious. I mean, it's hard to believe what's happening in Canada. What is this?
Well, I'm reluctant to use the word Kristallnacht because we're not there yet. That was the night of the broken glass in pre-Holocaust Germany, where they smashed and burned and killed Jewish synagogues. It was a precursor to the Holocaust. Obviously, we are not that far gone yet. But what do you call it when literally dozens of churches are being systematically vandalized, torched? There was one fire in the BC interior that wiped out a whole village of 250 people, 2 people dead, and it is not yet determined who caused it, but it was in an area where other churches have been torched, so it may actually have its first victims. The crazy thing is this is so explicitly an anti-church hate crime wave, and yet Justin Trudeau, who is normally the first and the wokest, waited a week before saying anything, and he literally said, that's not the way to go. That was as tough as he got. He introduced an anti-hate crimes bill in Parliament that's targeting mean tweets and Facebook posts. But literally you have church after church being torched by Antifa-style terrorists, and he's almost silent on the matter, and his right-hand man finds it understandable. I think these are dark days for religious freedom in Canada.
Yeah, when they're burning churches and the head of the BC Civil Rights Commission says, burn it all down? I mean, that person sounds like a dangerous lunatic. Who is that? What is going on?
And she hasn't been sacked. That was over a week ago that she said it. In fact, various board members of her Civil Liberties Association have supported her. By the way, these churches often have Aboriginal, Indigenous congregants, and they're saying, don't burn our churches down. It's the Canadian equivalent of when Black Lives Matter burns down Black-owned businesses in Black neighborhoods. That does not help Black people. In Canada, most of these churches are Aboriginal focused, and you often have, in one case, white Antifa-style vandals filming themselves desecrating a church. And the trouble is, from the very top, it's either silence or tacit support.
Yeah, and I'm ashamed to say that American Christian leaders mostly have been silent about it too, and I wish they wouldn't be. Ezra, I appreciate that report from Canada. I hope sometime to be able to visit Canada.
ਭਾਰਤ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦਾ ਵੀਜ਼ਾ ਰੋਕ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਪਰ ਕੀ ਭਾਰਤ ਨੇ ਟ੍ਰੇਡ ਰੋਕਿਆ? ਨਹੀਂ, ਇਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਸਿਰਫ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ ਖੱਜਲਖੁਆਰੀ ਕਰਨੀ। ਜੇ ਟ੍ਰੇਡ ਰੋਕੇ ਤਾਂ ਵੱਡੀਆਂ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਨੂੰ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਪਹੁੰਚਦਾ ਹੈ। ਜੇ ਹੁਣ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀਜ਼ੇ ਬੰਦ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਹਨ, ਹੁਣ ਅਗਲੀਆਂ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ NRIਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਚੁਣ ਕੇ ਹੀ ਲਿਆ ਜਾਏਗਾ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਏਗਾ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨੀ ਹਨ। ਦੋਸਤੋ, ਇਹ ਕੋਈ ਚੰਗੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਭਾਰਤ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਵੀਜ਼ੇ ਰੋਕ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਗਏ ਹਨ।
From US, from Canada, here, and although the numbers are not as much as 2017, but due to COVID, less number of NRIs have landed in Jalandhar this time to vote for their favorite parties, to vote for their, to canvass for their parties and to sort of make a difference here. But let's just speak to a few people here and try and figure out what the mood is amongst the NRI community this time. Sir, can I start with you? कहाँ से आए हो आप?
मैं न्यूयॉर्क से।
ਦੋਸਤੋ, NRIਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਜਾਣ ਦਾ ਰੋਕ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ।
Of the security threats being faced by our High Commission and consulates in Canada. This has disrupted their normal functioning. Accordingly, our High Commission and consulates are temporarily unable to process visa applications. We will be reviewing the situation on a regular basis.
ਅੱਜ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਣ ਤੋਂ ਰੋਕਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ। ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਨੂੰ ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਕਿਸਾਨੀ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਵਰਗਾ ਕੋਈ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਚੱਲਦਾ ਹੈ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਮਦਦ ਵੀ ਰੋਕੀ ਜਾਏਗੀ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਏਗਾ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਫੰਡ ਆਏ ਗਏ। ਤੇ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਵੀਜ਼ੇ ਤਾਂ ਬਹਾਲ ਕਰ ਦੇ, ਪਰ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਕਰੀਨ ਕਰਨਾ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਦੇ। ਜੋ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਹੱਕ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਨ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦਾ ਵੀਜ਼ਾ ਦੇਵੇ, ਪਰ ਜੇ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਖਤਰਾ ਲੱਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਵੀਜ਼ਾ ਰਿਫਿਊਜ਼ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ। ਸੈਂਟਰ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਸਿਕਿਉਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ 100%। ਪਰ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਤੇ ਯਕੀਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਰੋਕੇ ਜਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਨ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਕਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਇਆ, ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਕਨਫਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਕ੍ਰਿਸਟੀਆ ਫਰੀਲੈਂਡ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। ਉਹ ਹਨ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਡੈਪੂਟੀ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਅਤੇ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਟਰੱਕਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੇਸੀ ਦਾ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਪ੍ਰਗਟ ਕੀਤਾ।
To provide these authorities to FinTrack on a permanent basis. Second, the government is issuing an order with immediate effect under the Emergencies Act, authorizing Canadian financial institutions to temporarily cease providing financial services where the institution suspects that an account is being used to further the illegal blockades and occupations. This order covers both personal and corporate accounts. Third, we are directing Canadian financial institutions to review their relationships with anyone involved in the illegal blockades and report to the RCMP or CSIS. As of today, a bank or other financial service provider will be able to immediately freeze or suspend an account without a court order. In doing so, they will be protected against civil liability for actions taken in good faith. Federal government institutions will have a new broad authority to share relevant information with banks and other financial service providers to ensure that we can all work together to put a stop to the funding of these illegal blockades. This is about following the money. This is about stopping the financing of these illegal blockades. We are today serving notice. If your truck is being used in these illegal blockades, your corporate accounts will be frozen. The insurance on your vehicle will be suspended. Send your semi-trailers home. The Canadian economy needs them to be doing legitimate work.
ਪਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਦੀ ਸੋਚਿਆ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਕਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਤੇ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਕਿਸ ਨੂੰ? ਇਸ ਦਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਸਿਰਫ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ। ਜਦੋਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਜਾਣਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਏਗਾ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਵੱਖਵਾਦੀ ਨੇ, ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਉਣਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਏਗਾ ਕਿ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਬਾਂਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਫੜਦਾ। ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਸਮਝੌਤੇ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਕੋਈ ਹਵਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਿਕਲਣ ਦਿੰਦੇ, ਉਹ ਅੰਦਰ ਵੜ ਕੇ ਸਮਝੌਤੇ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ। ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਬਚਣ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਕੋਈ ਚੰਗਾ ਸਾਈਨ ਨਹੀਂ। ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੇਟ ਕਰੀਏ ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਸਬੂਤ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਵੇ ਅਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕੋਈ ਸਕਾਰਾਤਮਕ ਕਦਮ ਚੱਕੀਏ। ਸਾਵਧਾਨ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸੋਚਿਆ ਕਦੀ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿਸਾਨੀ ਮੋਰਚਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਿੱਤਿਆ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਸਿਰਫ ਮੋਦੀ ਦੇ ਖਿਲਾਫ ਹੀ ਸੀ? ਨਹੀਂ, ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਜੰਗ ਸੀ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਦੇ ਖਿਲਾਫ, ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਜੰਗ ਜਿੱਤ ਲਈ। ਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਕਈ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਹਮਲੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਜਾਣਗੇ, ਕਈ ਥਾਵਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਮੈਜੋਰਟੀ ਵੋਟਾਂ ਲੈਣ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਮਿਨੋਰਟੀ ਸਾਬਤ ਕਰਕੇ ਵੱਖਵਾਦੀ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਆਪਣਾ ਦੇਸ਼ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਹਨ, ਮੈਜੋਰਟੀ ਵੋਟਾਂ ਲਈਆਂ ਜਾਣਗੀਆਂ ਅਤੇ ਦੂਜੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਵਿਕਟਮ ਬਣਵਾ ਕੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੀਆਂ ਵੋਟਾਂ ਦੂਸਰੀ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿਕਿਉਰ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਜਾਣਗੀਆਂ। ਇਸ ਦਾ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੋਵੇ ਨਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਹੋਏਗਾ। ਸੋ ਮੇਰਾ ਤਾਂ ਇਹੀ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਵੇਟ ਕਰੋ। ਹਰਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਨਿੱਜਰ ਜੀ ਦਾ ਕਤਲ ਦਾ ਅਫਸੋਸ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਇਨਸਾਫ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਤੇ ਇਨਸਾਫ ਮੰਗਣ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੀਸ ਦਾ ਸਹਾਰਾ ਲਵਾਂਗੇ। ਧੰਨਵਾਦ।